He looked like just another broken cowboy begging for work, but what two single mothers did to Sterling Maddox would change everything he thought he knew about kindness. The dust clouds followed Sterling Maddox as he limped his horse into the small frontier settlement, his weathered face telling the story of too many lonely nights under unforgiving stars. His clothes hung loose on his tired frame, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had given up on finding anything good in this world. The town looked as weary as he felt, scattered wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support, much like the people who called this place home. Sterling's stomach twisted with hunger as he guided his mare toward what appeared to be the only boarding house in sight. He had exactly 3 coins left in his pocket, barely enough for a single night's shelter, but pride wouldn't let him sleep in the street again, not after what happened in the last town. As he dismounted, his legs nearly buckled beneath him. The journey from his failed ranch had taken everything out of him, and the constant gnawing in his belly reminded him that he hadn't eaten a proper meal in 4 days. He tied his horse to the weathered post and took a deep breath, preparing to face another rejection from another innkeeper who would take one look at his empty pockets and turn him away. The boarding house door creaked open before he could even knock, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. Mercy Whitmore had kind eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, and something in her gentle expression made Sterling's chest tighten with an emotion he thought he'd forgotten. She wore a simple dress that had been mended countless times, and her hands showed the calluses of someone who worked hard for everything she had. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a soft bed," Mercy said, her voice carrying none of the suspicion Sterling had grown accustomed to hearing. Behind her, Sterling could see the warm glow of lamplight and catch the scent of something cooking that made his mouth water despite himself. Sterling removed his hat, unsure how to respond to such unexpected kindness. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I should tell you up front that I don't have much money to pay you with." Mercy studied his face for a long moment, and Sterling braced himself for the familiar look of disappointment that would surely follow. Instead, she smiled in a way that reminded him of his mother, back when he still believed the world held good things for people like him. "Money isn't the only way to pay for hospitality," she said, stepping aside to let him pass. "Come inside, Mr. Maddox, Sterling Maddox." As he stepped across the threshold, Sterling felt something shift in the air around him. The warmth of the house wrapped around him like an embrace, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope that maybe his luck was finally changing. But Sterling didn't know that Mercy Whitmore and her friend Violet McCall had been waiting for someone exactly like him. The smell of fresh bread and stew filled Sterling's senses as Mercy led him through the modest boarding house. His stomach cramped with hunger, but something else nagged at him. The way she had said they'd been waiting for someone like him. What did that mean exactly? A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, peered at Sterling from behind a wooden chair, his wide eyes curious but cautious. The child had the same gentle features as Mercy, and Sterling guessed this was her son. The boy clutched a small wooden horse, carved with careful detail, and Sterling felt a pang remembering when he used to whittle similar toys for his nephew before everything fell apart. "Tommy, come say hello to Mr. Maddox," Mercy called softly. "He'll be staying with us for a while." Sterling frowned slightly. A while? He hadn't mentioned staying longer than a night, and he certainly hadn't discussed any arrangements beyond that. But before he could ask what she meant, footsteps echoed from the back of the house and another woman appeared in the doorway. Violet McCall was taller than Mercy, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to measure Sterling like she was appraising livestock. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had learned to rely on her own strength. Behind her stood a girl of about 15, with the same fiery hair and defiant posture that suggested she had inherited more than just her mother's appearance. "So this is him," Violet said, not bothering with pleasantries. Her gaze traveled from Sterling's worn boots to his faded hat, and he felt uncomfortably exposed under her scrutiny. He looked strong enough, despite the rough condition. Strong enough for what? Sterling's instincts, dulled by exhaustion and hunger, began to sharpen. These women were talking about him like he wasn't standing right there, and their words carried implications he didn't quite understand yet. "Violet," Mercy said with a warning tone, "let the man eat first. We can discuss business later." "Business?" Sterling's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, where his gun would have been if he hadn't sold it 3 towns back for horse feed. "Ladies, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. I'm just looking for a place to rest for the night. Then I'll be moving on." The two women exchanged a look that Sterling couldn't interpret, but it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Mercy's kind smile never wavered, but there was something calculating in Violet's expression that reminded him of a poker player holding a winning hand. "Of course," Mercy said smoothly, ladling stew into a bowl. "We'll talk after you've had a chance to recover your strength. You look like you've been through quite an ordeal." As Sterling accepted the bowl, his hands trembling slightly from hunger, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just walked into something far more complicated than simple frontier hospitality. But the food smelled too good, and he was too tired to think clearly about what these women might want from a broken-down cowboy with nothing left to offer. The stew was the best thing Sterling had tasted in months, but he couldn't ignore the tension that filled the room like smoke from a bad fire. Mercy bustled around the kitchen, refilling his bowl without being asked, while Violet sat across from him with her arms crossed, studying him like she was working out a complex problem in her head. Young Tommy had warmed up quickly, chattering about his wooden horse, and asking Sterling if he had ever seen real wild mustangs. The boy's innocent questions provided a welcome distraction from the increasingly uncomfortable silence between the two women. But even Tommy's daughter, who Violet had introduced as Clara, seemed to sense something was brewing beneath the surface. "Ma, why don't you just tell him?" Clara finally said, her teenage impatience cutting through the pretense. "He's going to find out anyway." Violet shot her daughter a sharp look that could have frozen water in July. "Clara, go help Mrs. Patterson next door with her washing. She's been struggling since her husband took sick." The girl rolled her eyes but obeyed, grabbing her shawl and heading for the door. As it closed behind her, the atmosphere in the room grew even heavier. Sterling set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair, his instincts finally overriding his gratitude for the meal. "All right, ladies," he said, his voice carrying the authority he used to command when he still had a ranch and men who respected him. "It's clear you want something from me, so let's have it out in the open. What kind of business are we talking about?" Mercy wrung her hands nervously, but Violet leaned forward with the directness he was beginning to expect from her. "We need a man around here, Mr. Maddox. Someone who can fix things, handle problems, and make this place look like a proper family establishment." Sterling felt his eyebrows rise. "You want to hire me as handyman?" "More than that," Mercy said quietly, finally sitting down at the table. "We need someone who can be a father to our children, someone who can give them stability and protection." The words hit Sterling like a punch to the gut. He looked between the two women, trying to process what they were suggesting. "Are you asking me to marry one of you?" Violet's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Both of us, actually, though not in any legal sense that would satisfy a preacher." Sterling's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up abruptly. "Ladies, I think you've got the wrong man entirely. I'm not looking for a wife, let alone two of them, and I'm certainly not father material." "Sit down," Mercy said, and something in her tone made him pause. Gone was the gentle woman who had welcomed him at the door. In her place sat someone who clearly knew how to get what she wanted. "You haven't heard our full proposal yet." Against his better judgment, Sterling found himself sitting back down. Maybe it was the first full meal he'd had in days, or maybe it was the exhaustion that made his thinking foggy, but he stayed to listen when every instinct told him to walk away. "You see, Mr. Maddox," Violet continued, "we've discovered that two single mothers trying to run a boarding house face certain challenges. Men don't respect us. They try to take advantage. Our children have no male guidance, but a respectable family man? That changes everything." Sterling stared at them both, finally understanding the trap that had been so carefully laid. But what shocked him most was realizing he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to escape it. Sterling's mind raced as he processed their proposal. "You're asking me to pretend to be your husband? Both of you?" "Not pretend," Mercy said firmly. "Live as a family. Share responsibilities. Help us raise our children properly. In return, you get a home, regular meals, and a purpose again." The weight of their words settled over him like a heavy blanket. Sterling had spent the last 2 years drifting from place to place, watching his life crumble piece by piece after losing his ranch to drought and debt. The idea of belonging somewhere again, of having people who needed him, stirred something deep in his chest that he thought had died. But Violet wasn't finished. "There's more you should know. This boarding house is the only thing standing between us and complete destitution. Mercy's husband died in a mining accident, left her with nothing but debts. My husband ran off with a saloon girl, took what little money we had saved." Her voice hardened with each word. We've been barely surviving on what little income we can generate from travelers. Sterling looked around the modest room with new eyes. Now he could see the careful patches in the wallpaper, the way the furniture had been arranged to hide worn spots in the carpet. These women had been putting on a brave face, but they were fighting a losing battle against poverty. The town council has been pressuring us to sell, Mercy added, her voice barely above a whisper. They say it's not proper for single women to run a business like this. They've found excuses to fine us, turned away potential customers, made life difficult at every turn. But with a man as head of household, Violet continued, they'd have to treat us with respect. You'd handle the business dealings, sign the papers, deal with the officials. We'd handle everything else. Sterling felt a familiar ache in his chest. He had failed to save his own ranch, lost everything he had worked for his entire adult life. Could he really trust himself to help these women keep their home when he couldn't even keep his own? What about other expectations? He asked carefully, not sure how to phrase the question that was burning in his mind. Mercy blushed deeply, but Violet answered with characteristic directness. We're not asking you to share our beds if that's what you're wondering. This is a business arrangement first. What develops beyond that? She shrugged. Time will tell. Young Tommy appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Ma, is Mr. Maddox really going to stay with us? Clara said he might be our new pa. The innocent hope in the boy's voice hit Sterling harder than any argument the women could have made. He saw himself in Tommy's eager expression, remembered what it felt like to have a father figure disappear from his life when his own dad died too young. We're still talking about it, sweetheart, Mercy said gently, scooping Tommy into her arms. Why don't you go get ready for bed? As the boy scampered away, Sterling realized that whatever decision he made would affect more than just his own future. These children had already begun to hope, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. That night, Sterling lay on the small cot in the back room they had prepared for him, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with thoughts that refused to settle. Through the thin walls, he could hear the soft murmur of the women's voices as they discussed something in hushed tones. Every instinct told him to saddle his horse at dawn and ride away from this complicated situation. But something deeper kept him rooted to that narrow bed. When morning came, he found Mercy in the kitchen preparing breakfast while Violet worked on mending a tear in one of the curtains. The domestic scene felt surreal after months of sleeping rough and eating whatever he could catch or afford. Clara sat at the table helping Tommy with his letters, and for a moment Sterling could almost pretend this was his real family. I've been thinking about your proposal, he said, accepting the cup of coffee Mercy offered him. The warmth spread through his hands, and he realized how long it had been since someone had taken care of him in such simple ways. Violet looked up from her sewing, her steel-gray eyes alert. And? I have conditions, Sterling said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. First, I want to know exactly what you expect from me. No surprises, no hidden requirements that come up later. Fair enough, Violet nodded. You'd handle all business with outsiders, suppliers, customers, town officials. You'd do repairs around the house and help with the heavier work. You'd be a father figure to our children, teach them what they need to know. And in exchange, room, board, a share of any profits from the boarding house, Mercy said. A place to belong. Sterling felt that last phrase settle into a hollow place in his chest. A place to belong. When was the last time he'd had that? Second condition, he continued. If this arrangement isn't working for any of us can end it. No hard feelings, no obligations. Both women exchanged glances, and Sterling caught something pass between them that he couldn't quite read. But Violet nodded agreement. Third, Sterling said, then paused. This was the hardest part to voice. I need to tell you that I failed before. Lost my ranch, lost everything I built. I'm not sure I'm the man you think I am. Mercy's expression softened in a way that reminded him painfully of his mother. Mr. Maddox, we're not asking you to be perfect. We're asking you to be present. Before Sterling could respond, heavy footsteps on the front porch announced a visitor. Violet frowned as she peered through the window. Then her face hardened with unmistakable anger. It's Mayor Hutchins, she said through gritted teeth, and he's brought the sheriff with him. Sterling watched as both women's demeanor changed instantly. Mercy's gentle confidence evaporated, replaced by the nervous energy of someone expecting trouble. Violet straightened her shoulders, but Sterling could see the tension in every line of her body. What do they want? He asked. Nothing good, Violet replied, already moving toward the door. They've been looking for excuses to shut us down for months. As the harsh knocking began, Sterling found himself standing without conscious decision. These women had offered him something he desperately needed, and now they were facing exactly the kind of trouble they had told him about. The irony wasn't lost on him. They needed a man to stand between them and the world's cruelty, and here was his first test. But as he moved toward the door alongside Violet, Sterling couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover just how deep this situation really went. Mayor Hutchins was a round man with small, calculating eyes that immediately fixed on Sterling with undisguised suspicion. Behind him stood Sheriff Coleman, a tall, lean figure whose hand rested casually on his gun belt in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. McCall," the mayor said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I trust you're both well this morning. And who might this gentleman be?" Sterling stepped forward before either woman could answer, drawing himself up to his full height. Years of commanding ranch hands had taught him how to project authority, and he let that old confidence settle over him like familiar clothes. "Sterling Maddox," he said, extending his hand with deliberate firmness. "I'm the new head of this household." The mayor's eyebrows rose, and Sterling caught the quick glance that passed between him and the sheriff. "Head of household? That's interesting news. We weren't aware that either of these ladies had remarried." "Recent development," Sterling replied smoothly, though his heart was pounding. "Is there something I can help you gentlemen with?" Sheriff Coleman finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to getting answers. "We've had complaints about this establishment, Mr. Maddox. Reports of improper conduct, violations of town ordinances." "What kind of complaints?" Sterling asked, though he could guess. He'd seen this pattern before in other frontier towns, officials using vague accusations to pressure people they wanted gone. "Noise disturbances," the mayor said, consulting a small notebook. "Unaccompanied men staying overnight without proper supervision. Questions about the moral character of an establishment run by, shall we say, women of uncertain marital status." Sterling felt anger building in his chest, but kept his voice level. "Well, as you can see, the situation has changed. These ladies are under my protection now, and I can assure you that everything here is completely respectable." "Protection," the sheriff repeated, his eyes narrowing. "Funny thing about protection, Mr. Maddox, usually requires some kind of legal arrangement. Marriage certificates, that sort of thing." The trap was closing, and Sterling could feel the weight of the women's hopes pressing down on him. Behind him, he heard Tommy's small voice asking his mother what the men wanted, and the innocent question made Sterling's decision for him. "The paperwork is being handled," he said with more confidence than he felt. "In the meantime, I assume you have actual business to conduct here, or are you just making social calls?" Mayor Hutchins's face reddened slightly at the challenge. "We're conducting an inspection. Mr. Maddox, standard procedure for all boarding establishments. We'll need to examine the premises, speak with any current guests." "Of course," Sterling nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Though I should mention that we have families staying here, including children. I trust you'll conduct yourselves appropriately." As the officials pushed past him into the boarding house, Sterling caught Violet's eye. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod of approval, but Sterling could see the fear lurking beneath her stern exterior. Whatever these men were really after, this inspection was just the beginning, and Sterling was beginning to realize that protecting this makeshift family might cost him more than he had bargained for. The inspection dragged on for what felt like hours. Mayor Hutchins poked into every corner, making notes about trivial violations. A loose board here, a curtain that didn't meet his standards there. Sheriff Coleman questioned the few guests in the boarding house with the thoroughness of a man investigating a murder. Throughout it all, Sterling stayed close, answering questions and making it clear that any business would be conducted through him. But it was when they reached the children's room that everything came to a head. "This arrangement seems rather irregular," the mayor said, watching Tommy show Clara his wooden horse. "Two families sharing accommodations, children from different mothers living together. The town has standards about proper family structures." Sterling felt something snap inside him. He had watched these men intimidate and belittle two women who were doing everything they could to survive and raise their children with dignity. He had seen the fear in young Tommy's eyes when the sheriff asked him pointed questions about his new father. Enough was enough. "Are you questioning my ability to provide for my family, Mayor Hutchins?" Sterling asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the sheriff's hand drift toward his gun again. "Now, Mr. Maddox," the mayor said, clearly sensing the shift in Sterling's demeanor. There's no need for hostility. We're simply ensuring that everything is proper. Proper, Sterling repeated. You want to talk about proper? Let me tell you what's proper. Proper is a man working hard to provide for his children. Proper is women keeping a clean, respectable establishment that serves travelers honestly. Proper is minding your own business when decent people are trying to build something good. The room had gone completely silent. Even the children sensed the tension crackling between the adults. Mercy had gone pale, but Violet stood straighter, and Sterling could see something like pride in her steel-gray eyes. Are you threatening an elected official? Sheriff Coleman asked, his hand now resting openly on his weapon. Sterling smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm not threatening anyone, Sheriff. I'm just making it clear that harassment of my family stops today. If you have specific violations to cite, cite them. If you have legal business to conduct, conduct it. But if you're just here to cause trouble for two women trying to make an honest living, then you can get off my property. For a long moment, nobody moved. Sterling could hear his own heartbeat and the soft sound of Tommy breathing beside him. The boy had moved closer during the confrontation, and Sterling felt a small hand slip into his. The gesture nearly undid him completely. Finally, Mayor Hutchins closed his notebook with a sharp snap. We'll be back, Mr. Maddox, and next time, we'll expect to see proper documentation of this arrangement. You do that, Sterling replied, but you'll find everything in order. As the officials left, Sterling realized that in defending this family, he had made a choice that would bind him to them more surely than any legal document. When Tommy looked up at him with shining eyes and said, "Are you really going to be our pa now?" Sterling found himself nodding before he even thought about it. That evening, as the household settled into a peaceful routine, Sterling sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Mercy brought him coffee, and for the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten, the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged. The arrangement that had started as mutual desperation had transformed into something Sterling hadn't dared hope for, a real family, built not on blood or legal documents, but on choice, commitment, and the shared determination to protect what mattered most. And as Violet joined them on the porch with her own cup of coffee, Sterling realized that sometimes the most unconventional families were the strongest ones of all. If you enjoyed this story of Frontier Family and Second Chances, please subscribe to our channel and consider supporting us with a super chat. It helps us bring you more stories from the American West. Click on the video on your screen to watch another tale of courage and redemption from the frontier.